Hey, Jillian.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good. We've just been chatting all about your book and who has a right to tell a story and Rebecca and all these different new things.
Awesome.
Yes. So sorry. And I meant all these things. And then I read Brenda's thing and I read new AJ Finn's new book title. I'll look it up, Brenda, and send it to you. I can't remember, but it's we're talking about the ending of your book and how her Becky ended up, because of everything that came out and the wife book publishing, that Becky ended up
Yeah.
being a seller, and the Netflix. So we're talking about AG Finn and how his stuff all fell apart. Now he has a new book coming out in 2024. So we were just kind of talking about how
And he had a Netflix movie too.
yes, and he's blurbed a million big authors books, and
Yeah.
they don't mind his blurb sitting on the front of their book. So clearly he has recovered, or at
He's
least
also a man, I'm just gonna
yeah.
say.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I was telling everybody that I got to meet you in person in Denver, which was so fun.
I know it was fun. It was great. I think we were both exhausted, but it was really fun to meet in person.
It's called End of Story. Okay, thanks, Kristen.
Okay.
Yes, I know I was, because I'd gone to this dinner that I thought was going to last like an hour, and it ended up lasting like over 3 hours. And then Jillian had come in with the time change and all this stuff, so it was there was a lot going on. But
But it was fun.
yeah, it was very fun. And how did your morning event go? Because so the way this conference worked, at the breakfast and the lunches, they would have like 10 to 12 authors, and they would get up and give a like 4-minute presentation about their book. And then afterwards you could go get the galley. So how did that go, Jillian?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, they did it alphabetically, so I had to go first, which often happens to me. And I was like, please don't do it alphabetically. And then of course they did. But it was good. It was fun. I had a lot of fun. It was like just that was the first time I had been to something like that post-COVID. So it was just kind of like fun to be back in person and see all the booksellers face to face. And it was good. I
Good.
liked it. Yeah.
That's so funny that you're talking about the alphabetizing, because I went to the lunch, or maybe it was the breakfast the next day, with Julie Chavez, and Chavez, would make her also in this,
Uh-huh.
and she was the fifth person alphabetically.
Oh, see, I was unlucky at that lunch, I think. I don't
She was thinking it was time for her to go, and then they'd be like, somebody else with the B last name, and she's like, I'm never
know.
going. So it was kind of
That's funny. Yeah, no, I was first.
so good. Well, I'm going to just kind of kick it off, and then I know people have questions, but so let's
Okay.
talk a little bit about where you got the idea and writing about Rebecca, and like, taking that story and incorporating it into your story.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So my last book, Beautiful Little Fools, was a reimagining of The Great Gatsby from the women's points of view. So it was like Daisy, Jordan, Myrtle's sister. So I had just finished writing that. And I was like writing a lot of pieces about writing retellings and what it was like to do a retelling. And I came across this piece about Daphne du Maurier, and it was talking about all her inspirations for Rebecca. And then it kind of just like mentioned in there that she had been sued for plagiarism, went to trial, ultimately, was found not guilty, but this whole trial ensued. And there were all these other claims of plagiarism against her for Rebecca. I mean, there were like two or three that, and so I read about all the stories, and I just was like kind of fascinated with the idea of like, who has the right to tell any story, who has the, are there any new stories? Because you could make an argument that Rebecca is kind of the same story as Jane Eyre. I mean, it's the elements are there. And there's been so many, like, Gothic novels with similar elements. I mean, one of the things that fascinated me that I read about Daphne du Maurier, and this was not the case that went to trial, but there was another book, and it was a Brazilian author. She wrote a book that was like so similar to Rebecca, and she supposedly sent it to Daphne's publisher in hopes of getting it translated. And Daphne was like working there at the time, reading manuscripts when she would have sent it. So they never ended up translating it. But then Rebecca came out a few years later, and she kind of always thought that Daphne had stolen it from her. And it had so many similar elements, like the dead wife and the wealthy man marries this new, younger woman, and a question surrounding her death. And but it's like it wasn't the same story though, because it was told differently. So I just became really fascinated with that. And then this is totally like kind of off topic, but I was interested in it. She never sued Daphne because her father, I think, was like an ambassador to the US, and she didn't want to like tarnish her family name. So even though she sort of believed it, and then when they made the movie of Rebecca, they actually went to her and had her sign off that she would not sue them when they made the movie. So I was just sort of like fascinated with all the questions of ownership, having just written a retelling myself, thinking a lot about it. And so that's where the initial seed came from. And so I thought, well, what if this woman who had written a retelling kind of falls into a retelling of her own, while she's trying to write a retelling? And I kind of like went off from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it's definitely who has the right to tell a story is a topic that seems to be very prominent these days from a variety of perspectives, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely something interesting to ponder.
Yeah. So I think I was just like personally interested in it. And it was one of those projects where I was like, well, I'm going to just write this for fun and it might never go anywhere. But then I got really invested in it. And, here we are.
Well, I want to step aside and let people ask some questions, and then I can always hop back in. So does
Yeah.
anyone want to ask anything? No?
I'll ask.
Okay.
Wait, Jada?
I'll ask. I just for the about the publishing industry. We were talking about that. How much, with all the agent stuff and the publishing houses and her friend, how much of that was based on what you've seen in the industry, or where was that inspiration from?
Well, I mean, the agent is like completely fictional and nothing at all like my agent. I mean, I'm sure that there are agents that are like that, but my agent is very like nice and down to earth. And, I consider her my friend as well as my agent. And so we've never had really any conversation like Olivia and Charlie had. So that was all fictional, or my cat would like to say hi. But in terms of like the publishing stuff, I mean, I would say most of it is true. And stuff that I've seen and have experienced myself. I mean, I've definitely had books that haven't done well because my editor has left or the imprint has closed. Or I feel like you see stories in publishing all the time where it's like a book isn't selling well, but then something weird happens and then suddenly it's on the bestseller list for no reason, or there's like a TikTok or something. So all of that is kind of like is all true, and there probably are agents like Charlie, just not from my own personal experience.
Well, I was thinking about after some of our conversations last week, I was thinking about that today because somebody, when I was scrolling through Instagram, had literally posted Park Rose is looking for a new editor, and
Yeah,
the author was
that's my editor. She just left.
and I wasn't going to say that, but I knew it was because of our conversation. But so they're like, my book is already there, and they were like, somebody want to like edit my book? I was like, oh, that's an interesting approach. So I thought
Yeah.
it was kind of funny because I knew that your editor had left, and so I was like, okay, this must be the same editor, but I just thought that was pretty funny. I was like, okay, that's
Yeah.
a novel. I've not seen an author post that before, so I was like,
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't post that, but I mean, it is kind of funny because like that does kind of come up in the fiction writer, and she did, and editors leave all the time. I mean, it's there's lots of, the publishing world is like a very small world, and there's lots of transition, and but yeah, I think yesterday was her last day.
I just had never seen anybody post that before, and I thought, oh, and I bet this is Jillian's editor because we just talked about that.
Yeah,
That
it
is a
was
tough
my
thing
editor.
for you all, like, the editor is the one who buys the book. So if your book gets bought, then they shepherd it through. I mean, you have the publicists and the marketers and the, cover people, and you've got the sales team, you've got all that. But your editor was your original champion. So if the editors bought the book and then they leave, then you're going to be shuttled to another editor who didn't buy your book, and they're probably not going to be as invested. So it definitely is an issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just, yeah, no, I know that can be the case, but it was interesting to see all of that. And I agree with you. It's so, I don't even know what the right word is, but it's so random, like a TikTok or, a reselection or whatever it's going to be, sometimes can kind of make or break things. And just how all that's done is so mysterious.
Yeah. And I feel like the publishing industry, like there's no rhyme or reason to a lot of what happens. And you know, and I think like a lot of times as an author, you kind of just feel sort of like desperate to just like write the next book. And, you know, if one book doesn't do well, then you want the next one to do better. And so definitely the desperation that Olivia feels, like I feel like that I felt that, you know, at times as a writer. And you know, and the reviews, and there's people, and there's I'm bitter about it now. I mean, The Fiction Writer is my 12th book, but I think like my first book, Kirkus didn't like my book, and I was just like crushed. And you know, and then you realize it's like, well, you know, people like your book and people don't like your book, and it really ultimately doesn't affect how the book sells. You know, there's all these other external factors that kind of affect how it sells. And but I think that's another like true element that I put in there.
Yeah. And Kirkus can be harsh.
And for the record, Kirkus did not like The Fiction Writer.
I wasn't
And they quoted in a very not nice review. They quoted the line from The Fiction Writer where it talks about Olivia getting a bad Kirkus review. And I was like, this is like funny at this point. So, I mean, it's fine. They're entitled to their opinion, but I was almost amused by it at that point.
That makes sense. Anybody else have a question they want to ask? Kristen, what were we talking about? I know there was a question we were going to ask. What was it?
A cat really wants to get into the chat. Sitting on the wire.
Oh, the inspiration, the how much was true about the she kind of talked about it.
Yeah.
The, with the
Daphne du Maurier and
Daphne du Maurier, yeah. But she addressed it.
That's true. I was thinking, I know we said we're going to ask you that.
Yeah.
So, well, what about your research? I mean, trying to like take on a story so well known like Rebecca, which you'd already done with The Great Gatsby as well. And I mean, they're different. One's a retelling, one's incorporated. Yeah. But like, tell me a little bit more about your research.
So I purposely did not reread Rebecca before I wrote this. I mean, I have read Rebecca several times in my life and love Rebecca, but I didn't want it to be a retelling of Rebecca. I sort of wanted it to like be in the spirit of Rebecca. So I intentionally did not reread Rebecca before I wrote, but I did read a lot about Daphne du Maurier's life. So I read a few biographies of her. And a lot, like some of those little tidbits get into the book. There's not very much, but there's just like little Easter eggs about her. And she was like so fascinating. But I read about her, you know, I read about the plagiarism trial, sort of read about like all the different editions of Rebecca and their reception. But that was most of my research, I would say. So it wasn't actually that much research. This is my first novel in a while that's not historical. So I did do a little bit because I wanted to know more about Daphne's life and just like get a little bit of that in there, but I did not do a whole lot.
Well, that's nice. Probably made it a little easier not having to do too much.
It did. I'm not really like there's a lot of historical writers who just like love research. And I like research to a point, but I'm not obsessed with it. So I actually enjoy the writing more. So yeah, so this is actually a really fun book for me to write.
I bet. Carmen?
Jillian, I really enjoyed the story. And following up on what Cindy said about, you know, the real aspects of the publishing world, but I had never heard of the LA Lit Gala. So I assume that's a real thing. I didn't look it up.
That's fictional. I made that up. Yeah,
it sounded so fun.
Carmen was getting her tickets to go.
Yeah, I know. Very exclusive. None of us can get tickets.
That was going to be my question. Have you ever been?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be invited if it existed, but it's not real.
Anybody else have anything? Okay, Jada.
I just wanted to know about Ash and his sexiest man alive. Was there anyone in Hollywood that you're picturing when you're writing it? Because I'm like thinking like George Clooney or Brad Pitt, but was somebody that you thought of that was your role model?
Like the tiniest bit inspired. This is strange, but I actually did watch the Rebecca movie on Netflix because I was like, oh, I'm not going to read Rebecca. But so he was like the tiniest bit inspired by Armie Hammer, who's in that movie. And then I read the whole like Vanity Fair piece on his like just bizarre family and everything that went on. And so just like the whole Asherwood family was the tiniest bit inspired by that Vanity Fair piece on Armie Hammer, but Ash is not a cannibal, so I did not take that detail.
I'll ask then. I just don't want to, if you have questions, I just want to make sure I'm not leaping in here. You know me, I'm always interested in the cover and the title. So was the title always The Fiction Writer? And then how did the cover come about?
The title is not The Fiction Writer. And I don't remember what the title was. I'm just generally not good with titles, but it did have another title, which I can't remember at the moment. Oh, it was the I had called it like The Other Mrs. Asherwood or something, or something with Mrs. Asherwood. But my agent read it and she was like, no, this isn't a good title. How about The Fiction Writer? And I was like, okay, that sounds good to me. And then it actually stayed through the whole process. And she kind of just quickly came up with it. But actually, I thought it fit really well. And a lot of times my titles will get changed when it gets to like the sales and marketing team, you know, they'll want to change the title, but that didn't happen this time. So she sort of just came up with that off the cuff. And I was like, sounds great. Let's go with that. And that stuck. And then the cover, you know, I'm not really involved in that at all. They do like show it to me. And I think I get, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm allowed to give input. I'm not really sure. I did love it when I saw it, but I know that they had a different cover first, that my editor really loved. And then they showed it to the sales and marketing team and they didn't like it. And I asked to see it just out of curiosity. And I agreed with the sales and marketing team. And there was nothing wrong with the cover. It just looked kind of historical. And this is my first book in a while that's not historical, which the sales and marketing team pointed out that they didn't want to confuse people. And I agree with that. So I thought that was a good choice. And then they came back with this one. So this was really like the first one that they showed me as a real cover. And I really liked it. And I think that original cover, they had like a manuscript on it and it was a book. It was kind of pretty, but after that, they were like, do you have any ideas? And I was like, well, what if we get Malibu in there? And so that's what they came up with. But I really had nothing to do with that. I am not an artist. I feel like they did an amazing job. I love the cover. Oh, and actually, when they got to this point, they did actually send me two and they were slightly different color schemes. So they asked me which one I liked better. There was this one, which was purple. And then there was one that was like a little more orange. And I thought they were both nice. At that point, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to make a decision. How am I going to do this? But I did like the purple one. And then I think my editor liked the purple one. And that's what they ended up going with.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's stunning.
Yeah, I think they did a really good job. And
yeah,
actually, it's really interesting. The book's coming out in Australia at the same time. So they took the same cover, but they added two people on it. So there's like a person on the beach and there's a person in the house. And it's so subtle. I almost didn't notice that it was different, but it's just like the slightest difference. And I thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting, especially something like that. You know, you're thinking it's not that different, but clearly something about that made them want to add the people.
Yeah, I like the people though. It's kind of cool. I was like, oh, that's a good idea.
Do your cover artists read the book?
I think so. I mean, I think they're
usually
supposed
do.
to, so I
Yeah.
hope that they would. Yeah.
I mean, I like this cover. I really like it a lot, but it wasn't until I read the book and they said it was the 1-story house, and in the cover it's the 2-story house.
Yeah, probably they used like some kind of a stock image or something, and that's what they that's how they figured it out. But yeah.
I thought that when with the Simone St. James book, The Sundown Motel, which I loved, but the sign didn't match what they had said in the book, and I was like, you know, but I think
sometimes they're like trying to get it in a way where it's the least expensive but also to still match the book. So, and
to stand out, you know, and I think like a graphic image that is really standing out. And so I think that they do that too, but you're like, okay, there's a little disconnect. So, well, do you have a writing process? Like, what does your writing process look like?
Yeah, I mean, people always ask me if I'm a plotter or a pantser. And for the most part, I'm a pantser, which means I sort of fly by the seat of my pants as I write. For my last book, which was the Gatsby retelling, I was a plotter, and I plotted everything out meticulously, chapter by chapter, because I was like retelling, the Great Gatsby. And so I wanted to make sure I got certain scenes in. And I actually had a really like a much easier time with it. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do this all the time. This is like much more streamlined, so much easier. But then I started writing The Fiction Writer. And like I said, when I first started writing it, I was thinking, well, this is just going to be for fun. This isn't going to go anywhere. And so I'm like, I'm going to just like write a little bit at a time and see where it goes. And so then, of course, I had no plan, no plot. I just pantsed my whole way through the book until I had a full book. And then I was like, oh, I really enjoy writing this way. So I guess I do have a writing process, but I don't know that it's always the same from book to book. I had a lot of fun doing The Fiction Writer because I didn't know what was going to happen 100% in my first draft. I mean, I had to do a lot of revision going into it, not knowing, but I had a lot of fun sort of like discovering what was happening as I was writing, and sort of like remembering that I love that part of writing rather than writing everything that I had planned out ahead of time. So, yeah, I don't know. In terms of like actually getting the writing done, I usually try to write about 5 pages a day when I'm drafting every weekday. And I just sort of like make myself write those 5 pages every day, whether they're bad or not. And often they're bad in the first draft, but I just like have to get through them to get to the next step. So that's normally how I draft.
Did you start out with the book within a book, or did that get added later?
I did start out with a book within a book. I didn't know what it was at first myself, but I did know that there was a book within a book. I was like, when I first started it, I was like, I'm not sure who's writing this book within a book. And then I did figure it out as I was, doing the first draft, but I always had that aspect in there.
So I'm curious because I think that there seem to be more, it's okay. There seem to be more and more unique formats. Like that is, like, or combination formats, like the book within a book, or emails, or,
yeah,
Netflix series, or whatever it's going to be. Like, do you think that that is the future of the publishing world, to kind of have these more creative formats?
Oh, maybe. I mean, I think like for me, I felt like I wanted that because it was a book about a writer writing a novel, and I felt like it was fitting to have snippets of a novel in the book. I feel like people are kind of like always pushing the boundaries and trying to find the next like thing that's going to make them stand out. So I'm sure. I mean, that we're gonna get a novel that's like all in text or something. That probably already exists. I just haven't read it.
I just think that our world has changed so much too, with the use of social media and email, and text, that it kind of becomes part of our world. And so I'm just curious if you feel a push to do any of that, or if it, is still kind of up to whatever works for you. And like you said, this was about a writer, so it made sense to have a book
I mean,
with
I felt like it made sense for this book. I will tell you, my next book is just 2 points of view. There's 2 women characters, and one is telling her story in the 1980s and one is telling her story in the present, and they entwine. So it's a pretty, I would say that's like a pretty standard format. So it's not like something I would do every time. I just felt that it was fitting for this particular story.
Well, and did you really have to think a lot about, I mean, how did you kind of approach the who can tell a story? Because I do think that is a very relevant topic that is being addressed in a variety of stories these days. Like, how did you approach dealing with that issue?
Well, I think, having a main character that's a writer and being a writer, I got to sort of like let her think about things from the writer's perspective, which is in some ways my perspective. I mean, she's a very different person than me, but we do have that like writer brain in common. And I think, like I think about that a lot too. Like, what stories do I have the right to tell, and what belongs to me and what doesn't belong to me? And I have a lot of story ideas that I wouldn't write because I feel like I'm not the right person to tell them, or like I don't have ownership of that particular topic or story. And so it's like things that I think about all the time. And I think a lot of writers think about that stuff all the time, because it's for every book that I write that I have an idea for, I have probably 10 other ideas for my next book that I've discarded for one reason or another. So we're always sort of thinking about like what we should be writing about, which sometimes conflicts with what I want to be writing about, if that makes any sense. My dog's like coughing in the background now. They're just really on display here.
They just want to make sure that they're making their presence known.
Yeah, always. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was just like something that I'm interested in. And then, so I wanted to explore it in the book, I think.
I definitely think it's an interesting topic. And in terms of like a story like this that, you know, maybe she had encountered years before, didn't remember, but like it's been so long. So then is it okay to tell somebody else's story? I mean, there's just a lot of like things to kind of.
Right. And they were both retelling Rebecca, which is this famous novel. And it's like, who has the right to do a retelling? But lots of people do retellings. So it's, you know, it's like, who does, and I mean, I personally feel like the way you tell the story is what belongs to you. And there's only like so many plots that can exist. And so it's like two different writers could kind of try to write the same story, but it would be totally different just because of their voice and the way that they're writing it. And I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think that I'm sure retelling has always been prevalent, but it just seems like there's a lot of it today, you know, and people are acknowledging it, but Jane Austen, Greek myths, The Great Gatsby, you know, it just seems like that there's a lot of that, and that people are enjoying kind of seeing how people interpret stories.
Yeah. And I love retellings. So I wrote my own retelling. So I do love retellings, but I'm also just sort of like fascinated by all the questions around them too.
Yeah, and how that works. No, I agree. I most of the time like retellings. Like I love Jane Austen, so every once in a while I'll be like, oh, this retelling didn't work with the story so well. But most of the time it's really interesting to see how people approach it.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything they want to ask? All right, well, I'll ask one more question. What have you been reading lately, Jillian? Or what do you want to read?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm like working on edits for my next book. So I have not really read anything in a few weeks. I will say like one thing I read pretty recently that is similarly themed to The Fiction Writer is Yellowface. So I don't know if you guys have read that. You're all not.
I haven't read it, but we were talking about it earlier because it also addresses who has the right to tell a story and somebody telling somebody else's story.
Yeah, but I mean, it's different because it's like really about this woman who plagiarizes. Like she really.
Yes, but we were just saying, you know, that's a common theme right now.
Yeah, it is.
And that Yellowface was part of that.
I think that was actually the last book that I read before I started revising. And I have like stacks here. I get a book from Book of the Month every month, and I should just stop because they're just all piled up like behind me. So at some point when I'm finished with my revision, I will go into those stacks.
And do you get asked to blurb?
I do. And yeah, so actually that's probably the last book that I read. I did read, oh my gosh, I can't remember what it's called, but it was about the woman who played the woman who was in Gone with Hattie McDaniel, who was in Gone with the Wind. It was like a biographical historical fiction. So that was actually the last book I read. I did read that for a blurb. I have Meredith Jager's new book to blurb here also that I'm gonna probably be reading next. But yeah, in terms of just like going to my Book of the Month stack, the last one I think I read was Yellowface. So
while you're doing edits, you don't read usually?
I don't, or writing. I don't like to read. I mean, I will read, you know, for a blurb if somebody needs it. But I try not to read anything else. Yeah. And then I'll have like a period where I'll take a break in between books and I'll read like 20 books and then I'll go into the next book and then I won't read anything again for a few months. So.
Well, and that's always another thing that's interesting about the publishing world is kind of the schedule that things are working on. Like, well, this book is getting out into the world. You know, you're working on your next one. And then sometimes the other one before that, you know, there's just a lot happening and trying to kind of keep them all straight, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like when I'm like writing or revising, I'm really absorbed in the voice in my book, and it just takes me out of it to get absorbed in a book I'm reading, which is like a different voice. So I just can't do them at the same time unless I read something completely different. Like I could read a nonfiction book and that would be fine, but I don't really read novels when I'm working on a novel unless it's for a blurb, and I promised I'd do it.
Yeah, that has to be hard just to balance it all. Yeah, Kristen.
Jillian, are you going on tour for the release of your new book for the fiction writer?
I am. Yeah, I'm just doing a little tour. I'll be in Phoenix, and I'll be in New York, and I'll be like in the Philadelphia area. Just a few events. Yeah.
Where in New York?
It's the Bookmark Shop, but they're doing like a cocktail event at a restaurant. So it's in Brooklyn, but I don't actually have all of the details yet, but I will post it on my website. I don't know if you're in New York, but it's
on Long Island. So yeah.
Oh, you're on Long Island? Yeah. So I think it's in Bay Ridge, which is not really that close to you, but
yeah, but I go into New York a lot. So maybe
okay, well, I'm gonna post, I think they're supposed to be sending me the details. It's gonna be like a cocktail hour at a restaurant. So it should be fun.
Yeah, that's
I'm
great.
Long Island also.
Oh, yay.
Kristen and I did a Brooklyn bookstore tour. One of the times I was up there, we went and walked around to a bunch of the different bookstores in Brooklyn. It was really fun.
Yeah, we had a great time.
Yeah, I've never been to this actual store, and it's like very far into Brooklyn, but it seems like they do really cool events, so I'm excited.
Cool. I don't know if I've been to that one, but I'll check it out.
Good. Well, anybody else before we wrap up? Well, Jillian, thank you. It was really, really nice to chat with you, and we enjoyed reading your book and learning all the behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you for reading early. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everybody have a great night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye.